Okay, so let's start with Anton that he will do an introduction of himself. So welcome, Anton. Can you tell us a bit about you?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so my name's Anton Gerasimov, and I'm security engineer here at Cellframe Protocol. Just to speak to you a little bit about my background. So I started out with a diploma in fundamental mathematics, and I got that from University Paris 6. So what was formerly called Pierre and Marie Curie, and now it's called the Sorbonne. Also, I have a master's degree from HEC Paris. And so for a long time, I worked in finance and most notably at Bloomberg LP in the equity capital market space, where I specialized in mergers and acquisitions, equity offerings, and corporate actions, and sort of worked quite a bit on automation also of certain data processes there. And so after that, I moved into the crypto space with Cellframe, where so I'm now the security engineer, and I have a few different areas of focus. I work on implementing symmetric encryption in the form of the 3-fish and the AES block cipher algorithms. Also working on increasing the modularity of the cryptographic library of Cellframe. And finally, I've implemented unsigned arithmetic. So this is for 2 to the 128 and 2 to the 256 unsigned integers. And this is necessary for Cellframe to integrate with other blockchain protocols and to be able to calculate balances in the wallet. So yeah, that's just a little bit about my background. And so we'll have obviously space to discuss those points in particular later on, but just to, so Blasco, do you want to sort of give me the questions, or should I just proceed with the introduction?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So just to cover some
let's
basics.
start with the questions.
Yeah. So just to cover some basics for you guys. Yeah, go ahead, Blasco.
Okay, let's start with basics questions about cryptographic that involves the full Cellframe ecosystem. What is a cryptographic protocol?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So this is just the basics to give you guys an introduction. So essentially, a protocol, not even necessarily cryptographic, is a series of steps, right? Follow a set of rules that we follow to attain a certain goal. And in the case of a cryptographic protocol, this means a set of steps that we carry out to, on the one hand, to keep both communication and data secure. And this means that the technology that we have is used in a way that is intended by the designer and not for any nefarious or crucially unseen purposes. So again, not everything is immediately an attack. If you have kind of unpredicted and strange, that is always a red flag, because that is potentially an area of exploitation, meaning that it's not always easy to foresee how your tools can be misused. So we have our Cellframe protocol. We have a cryptographic library, but it's bolted on to the rest of the protocol. So it is designed for specific tasks, and it protects within the out of mathematics, right? And modern cryptography is very heavy on mathematics, and especially this post-quantum stuff that we're going to discuss with you today is heavy on mathematics. But a cryptographic protocol is not only mathematics. So the steps that we need to carry out and the measures that we need to make a protocol safe is, yes, there's a mathematical component to it, but there's also understanding how these pieces, they're kind of like Legos, how do these pieces join together? And yes, we understand some of the mathematical constructs that go into this protocol, but the question is have we joined them up in the correct ways? And sometimes that relates to questions that are not purely mathematical, but also being attentive as to how things can be used or misused. Sorry, there's some guys writing about not hearing, so I'm assuming that most of you can hear. Okay. And just to continue with this introduction, if we now look at the main kinds of cryptography that is in existence, and obviously this is also relevant for us at Cellframe, there is symmetric and asymmetric cryptography. So what is symmetric? Symmetric means that I am communicating with my friend, and we are communicating over an insecure channel, and the information that I'm sending to my friend needs to be scrambled. It needs to be garbled so that it's illegible to third parties, because third parties could potentially be reading what I'm sending over the insecure channel. So what does that require? That requires a shared secret key between us. This is why it's called symmetric, right? Is because we have the same key. There's symmetry between us. And that's what allows us to garble, to encrypt, and to decrypt the scrambled message on the other side. Asymmetric is different. It means that if I send my message, a secret message to my friend, that my friend is the only one able to decrypt it. So we need to have certain parameters established between us so that we can have that type of relationship. So just to bring it a little bit closer now to Cellframe and sort of what we are preventing, what we are seeking to achieve with Cellframe is that we are protecting against the appearance of quantum computing capabilities. Now, in what I said into the, with respect to the two kinds of cryptography, symmetric cryptography is actually fairly safe against quantum computing. So at least for now, there haven't been methods that have been demonstrated to break symmetric cryptography with quantum computers. And asymmetric cryptography, on the other hand, which is also a key component of modern cryptography, has been shown to be vulnerable. So what does that mean? That means that there's existing methodologies, there's existing algorithms that have already been designed, that have been demonstrated to work in theory. But so as soon as the hardware becomes operational, that's it. And so as you know, major tech companies like IBM, like Google, these projects, and that's kind of like tip of the ice, because these are the public companies, right? And say in China are doing, because that would be classified information. So we could well imagine that the work being done, say by Google, so that is one of the main attributes of the Cellframe protocol, is to provide protection against the vulnerabilities caused by the capabilities of quantum computing. Yeah, so that's my answer. Blasco, if you want to give the next question.
Sure. Okay, Anton, can you tell us what is the difference between classic and post-quantum algorithms?
Yes. So in a nutshell, I think the fast way to explain this is that it's the nature of the mathematical problems involved. And so the two main classic areas of cryptography, so asymmetric cryptography, are elliptic curve cryptography and the RSA algorithm, which has been around for a few decades now. And essentially the way cryptography works in its mathematical manifestation is that we want to have functions that are called one-way functions. So we can do something, but it's very hard to undo. So it's very hard to inverse the function. And that's generally how we think about these things in cryptography. And the main question is, what sort of mathematics are we using to create these one-way functions? Now, in the case of elliptic curve cryptography, it's an elliptic curve. So it's not a curve as you would imagine, like if you drew an ellipsis on a piece of paper, but actually it's an elliptic curve about that is in a certain kind of mathematical structure. And there's something called modular arithmetic. Actually, it's a curve in a space turn around in circles, right? So kind of like if you imagine a clock. So when it hits 12, it goes back to 0. So if you have numbers are no longer numbers like we imagine, like 2.5, 3, 3.2, 3.3, 3.3, and all that. But it's this funny space where numbers wrap around themselves. That's where we establish a curve, and then we do all sorts of arithmetics on the points of that curve. And one operation that we do, and that is this one-way construct, is on this curve, we move points around so many times that it becomes very difficult to work backwards once you've kind of like if you imagine pushing a point on a circle a few million times, it's impossible to say where that point was initially before you pushed it, say, 1,200,000 times. And so that's kind of intuitively, that's the rationale behind elliptic curve cryptography. With RSA, these are, it has to do with the problem of factorization and exponentiation. So what this is that, again, the one-way function logic is that if we take a number and raise it to a certain power, it's actually very hard with a computer to go the other way. So it's very hard to figure out, once you know the result, to what power that number was raised. And so those are some of the problems you see that underlie classic cryptography. And post-quantum cryptography, and so yes, and so what's the problem is that quantum computers, because of their basic architecture, because they work on a different kind of logic, they can actually tackle these problems in much more efficient ways than our current computers. And as an example, you have two main algorithms that have been designed, as I said earlier. It's still on paper, it's theoretical, but as soon as the hardware is ready, it can implement these things. Is Grover's algorithm. So that is a generic algorithm which speeds up calculations, and it lowers the amount of calculations for this one-way function from n, the size of inputs to the one-way function, to actually the square root of n, which is a very substantial speed up. Now, obviously, this being a quantum computer, it returns a result with a certain probability, because, you know, at the particulate level, there's everything works with probabilities. The next algorithm is Shor's algorithm, which is now not a generic algorithm, but is a specific prime factorization algorithm. And a specialized algorithm that allows to reverse the exponentiation. So it's prime factorization, and this is a head-on attack against the RSA algorithm. So that's my answer. Let's go. Next question.
Let's go. So what kind of encryption tools are in Cellframe, and what are the algorithms are used?
Differing mathematical methods, and in this case, these algorithms rely on lattice cryptography. And what that is to illustrate things in kind of a more understandable way is that imagine if we have a matrix and we multiply a vector by a matrix to get another vector. Now, inverting that operation, remember we're talking about one-way functions here, is quite easy. Like we know how to invert matrices. That's a very standard sort of problem. Now, if we modify that calculation and we do a multiplication of by a matrix of a vector plus another small vector to get a result, then that becomes much, much, much more difficult to invert. So again, that's a way function logic. And actually, so this is why this is a good algorithm for post-quantum cryptography, is that it's exponential on a classical computer and it's exponential on a quantum computer. So the quantum computer doesn't actually offer very much superiority in terms of reversing these calculations as our current computers. So that's what we want. We want to be able to protect against the attacks of this coming quantum computer. And that's sort of the mathematical intuition behind what lattice cryptography is. And just to add that, you know, we haven't invented this problem. So the National Institute for Standards and Technologies in the US has already started and is quite far advanced in including the new algorithm for its post-quantum standards. So this problem has been identified, the appearance of a quantum computer has been identified as standards are already in the process of being made to protect against this vulnerability. And, you know, regardless of how quickly quantum computers develop, in the world of cryptography, we are in an adversarial setting, and we need to be protecting not only against the threats that exist currently, but that could exist, because otherwise we're not doing our job as cryptographers if we're only thinking of in terms of the threats that currently exist. Yeah, and so just lastly, we do have implemented a ring signature for those types of transactions.
Let's go with the next question.
Sure.
Okay. What exactly are the advantages of cryptography provided by the Cellframe SDK?
Yes. So the SDK has proprietary implementation of our asymmetric cryptography, which is a big bonus because we're not using external cryptographic libraries or implementations for asymmetric encryption. So this is a C implementation. So this is something that we will cover in the coming questions, but we have a large variety of encryption algorithms, and also we have a multivariate option of the ability to vary between differing signatures. So we can actually, not only can we switch between algorithms, we can sign with differing algorithms so that it's unclear what algorithm was used for signing.
Okay, and what is the difference between the low level and each level language?
Yeah, so the difference between low and high level languages is that, so we're at a very, very low level. And we'll talk a little bit about C in the next question, but what we are able to do with the low level language is we are able to interface with the hardware, the guts of the computer in a much more direct way. And what that means is that we have a lot of power to control what's happening at the machine level. And that is very different from how people work, say, in Java or in Python or even in Go, where there are things like garbage collection, there's just-in-time compilation. So the developer in high-level languages is forced to work with abstractions. He doesn't have much power over what's happening at sort of the machine level. And as a result of that, there's a lot that's done for him that he doesn't control. But on the one hand, that's safe and that protects against bad developers. But that also means that you're given less control over what you do. So that means that that ultimately the protocol, if you're doing it in a high level language, you're paying a penalty for not being good enough to develop on that lower level.
Let's go to the next one, Anton.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
then why Cellframe is great in C?
Yeah, so we have written it in C, which is for those that aren't familiar, this is kind of like it's the language that kind of rules the computing world without being very well known. Like, people don't hear about it, but essentially the guts of your computer, the operating system, whether it's Windows, whether it's Mac, whether it's Linux, everything is written in C, and even devices, so embedded devices, are written in C. And that's the reason for that is speed. So it's raw speed, and so it's kind of like, the Ferrari of programming languages. And it's like I was saying earlier, it gives you maximum control over what's happening in the machine, or in the machine, without placing restrictions on you. So it also means that you have to have a very high level of expertise in software development. So in our team, we have veteran programmers, people who have been working for decades in this language, and that's truly, the kind of caliber of developer that you need to have to be able to write in C. So, in the embedded space, working with devices, microcontrollers, like those sorts of developers. So basically the choice was made in that way, is that you have to be good enough to stomach it. But if you can stomach it, you're going to have something that is freakishly fast. And because we have very experienced, good developers, then we can use that skill set to really build something that works very, very fast and that can integrate with anything.
Okay, and safe math, why we need it?
Yeah, so this is the project that I myself am actually working on, and in the world of cryptocurrency, the calculations are done on numbers that are of the order of 2 to the power of 256, and so and that are unsigned. So what does this mean? It's a number that because of cryptography, these are gigantic, gigantic numbers. And our computers aren't really designed to work with this size of number. It's not something that our computers are typically tasked to do. So why such freakishly large numbers? Like, I think 2 to the power of 256 is a number that's sort of the order of the number of particles in the universe. So the number that's already sort of reaching sort of the threshold of physical reality, like a little bit bigger, and you're in the space of numbers that doesn't even exist in the universe. So why is it that way? Well, it's security reasons, right? Because in cryptography, we intentionally inflate numbers to gigantic sizes so that we can't do operations backwards on those one-way functions, right? Meaning that we have to construe artificially large numbers so that people who want to do things that they're not supposed to do can't play with them in ways that we don't want them to put things very, very roughly. But so yeah, so that's the reason of that, of those size of numbers. And nonetheless, there's a few conditions as to how this needs to be implemented. So this is what I work on. There was a vulnerability in Ethereum a few years back where one of these numbers overflowed. And what that means is that this is a typical security vulnerability in code. It's called integer overflow, where this kind of number that is called an unsigned number, it out in a different context. So yeah, this kind of number. So this kind of number, when it goes up to 1, so when it goes up to 2 to the power of 256, you add 1, it'll go to 0. But the problem is that the developer who's using these functions may not know that, or he may just not subtraction, increment, addition, multiplication, but that it generates a flag that says whether that overflow has happened. So it's math, but it's safe math. So it provides a flag that alerts the developer to any potential overflows and therefore to any security vulnerability.
I think with this question we reached the final of the questions that we got here, and we will start with the community questions. I saw some here from a GUI before that was asking about when is planned to launch the mainnet of Cellframe.
Oh yeah, this is actually a tech only. This is essentially about cryptography only. So that's those questions will be covered in other AMAs with other members of the team.
Okay. Any member here got a question for Anton about cryptography? Trader, you can write your question there. It's not. Also, Anton, you were talking about the development is being done in C. Okay, there are another language in low level that are getting so many traction in the space. That is, for example, Rust. Is C faster than Rust?
Okay, yeah, so that's actually an interesting question, which I will address before I move to this question that is here. So with regards to Rust, there's been a lot of interest around Rust, and that is justified. But the problem is that when you're dealing with things like hardware or with network protocols, you are dealing with something that you call systems engineering. And the pace of the systems engineering world moves at a very different, it's very different from that of, say, higher level languages. And basically, C has been around since the 70s, so that has permitted it to reach a critical maturity. Now, that's not to discount Rust and to say that that it isn't good, but at the moment, it's very immature. It's just appeared on the scene, and it hasn't really been tested in critical applications. So for the moment, like, it's a little too early to be deploying systems engineering projects on C. And for example, in the embedded space, they wouldn't take Rust as a programming language if they're in a sort of a production embedded environment, because there's a risk tied to the immaturity of the language.
I see.
Yeah,
Thank you
so
so much.
let me answer how common C vulnerabilities are addressed. So some of the methods that are used is penetration testing, statistical analysis, fuzz testing, and reliance on ethical hackers. I mean, this is all in addition to, standard security review and audit of the code by experienced developers. Okay, next.
There is another one that mentions if C is the last secure language out there.
Well, yeah, so to answer that question, with power comes responsibility. I think that's the best way to answer it. If you want full control over the machine, that's going to obviously bring with itself a set of vulnerabilities. So like I was saying before, the full power is given to developers. So that's why you need veteran, extremely experienced and highly knowledgeable C programmers, because if you want that level of speed and performance, you cannot have all of those barriers that are put in your way by higher level programming languages. So if you want speed, you have to be sort of unrestricted. You can't be inhibited by any sort of constraints if you want that kind of performance. Okay, yeah, and so one second here, I'm going to answer the next question. Yeah, so the integration of Cell with how does the cryptography of Cell applicable to new project. So on several levels, first of all, the C language, one of its powers is how well it integrates with other sort of languages, with other platforms. And so that's very powerful in terms of our integration capabilities, and also just layering languages on top of it, like Python. Python itself is written in C. So the cryptography we have is quite varied and wide, and we're continuously working on adding new ones. So for example, we're going to be adding the three-fish tweakable block cipher. So I would say that the library is quite dynamic in that sense, and we have quite a bit of differing algorithms for the moment, and we are constantly expanding. So what makes Cellframe cryptography unique compared to existing blockchains? So there hasn't been much rollout of post-quantum cryptography as of yet. So for example, like Bitcoin does not provide it, and neither does Ethereum. So the post-quantum algorithms is something that is new, and that other blockchains, I mean, the majority of them is not rolling out. And can other blockchains simply update their, in a way that is quantum resistant? Yeah, that's a good question. Well, the thing is that in order to do that, they need to add new forms, new algorithms, and I mean, there's not typically a lot of movement on that side. Like typically, if a cryptographic library has been developed for a blockchain protocol, it stays quite static. So in that sense, we're kind of providing something that is quite unique, and it's also in a proprietary implementation. So that, from a security perspective, is very interesting, because it means we've done it ourselves. Like these post-quantum algorithms, we've done ourselves, which is an advantage when you do a proprietary implementation. It's because to actually discover vulnerabilities, he has to go through your code and in it and work on it. So it's more difficult to discover vulnerabilities in somebody's proprietary implementation rather than a common implementation used by many people. Will the SDK be only in Python? So we already have JavaScript, and in the future, we're going to have all of the main languages, Java, .NET, and all that. So again, the C the C platform is very important for that, for effective integration with other languages. Yeah, just one moment. I'll be addressing the next question in a second. Yeah, remember, guys, we're sticking to sort of technical subject matter questions. Other issues relating to financial and profile questions are sort of outside of the scope of this meeting. So regarding developers building on Cellframe, so yeah, work has commenced in that area. We're actively recruiting more developers, and there's hackathons being planned for September. Okay.
Some people want to know a bit more about your background.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the focus of this call is sort of mostly technical subject matter. Well, what I can say is sort of just reiterate my background in terms of mathematical education. I have quite a bit of development experience in Python, and I've been working in C for the Cellframe protocol in a cryptography, but also in a development capacity. So for example, just to detail a little bit about this arithmetic project, like that's a more development type project, just cryptography strictly speaking, and it involves mimicking in C almost the calculations that are done at a binary level, first of all, building all of the functions that replicate logical operations in C for larger numbers, so 128 and 256. So like or, equal, left shift, right shift. And from those basic logical operators, crafting the higher level operations like sum, multiplication. So that's really low level development in sort of its purest form. And after that, there's obviously the sort of the very laborious testing component, which is testing on all values that are sort of like looping through values so that we check all of the edge cases, that the edge cases are calculating correctly in the unit tests. So that's a very development heavy project, just to give you a little bit of an idea of where I stand in terms of my development skill set. And I already covered the cryptography side of what I do for Cellframe. So yeah, so I think we can wrap it up there. Thank you everybody for your questions and for your attention. It was a pleasure speaking to you all. Thank you, Blasco, for presenting. And I hope that this was useful and interesting for everybody who was attending. So have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, Anton. And thank you to our community for joining with us, and see you in the next AMA.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.